Hi everyone, it's Adam with Milo's Restoration. And today I've got this antique table that I found at a wholesaler that I buy a lot of my furniture from. And I decided to take it home and refinish it. It was in pretty decent shape overall. There was a lot of scuffs in the finishes, enough to where it definitely needed to be refinished. And judging by some of the aspects of the piece, like the way that these pocket holes are cut, I'd say it's definitely probably more of an antique than it is a vintage piece. Probably from 40s, 50s, something like that. And probably definitely not the 60s or 70s in my opinion. But nonetheless, I decided to just sand off the finish and not necessarily use stripper on any surfaces but those curved surfaces. So that's what I started with initially, and that went pretty smoothly. So here, I'm just going to spray a little bit of Citrus Strip out of the can. And just those curved surfaces, detailed moldings that I couldn't get in. And then what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of lacquer thinner, I'll wipe it down, and just make a couple passes, alternating between the brush and a rag with lacquer thinner on it to get off the residual finish. It won't remove all of the dye, quite like sanding will, but I'll go over it with a sander again. It just helps to get a lot of it out because sanding those curved surfaces is a lot more difficult. Even with the surf prep sander, it's really still difficult with a sander like that, even with its kind of, foam interface to sand curved surfaces well when it comes to stripping. It's easy for finishing, but it's really difficult for a strip sanding to remove coating. So this is a very important step if you're going to be using a water-based dye stain or a water-based finish. You really need to raise the grain and then do another final sanding. So that's what I'll do after this. I'll just raise the grain. I put a lot of water on it, make sure that it gets, saturated into the grain on all sides very well. And then I'll sand it down and just go from there. So this is Saman water-based wood stain. I really like it. I actually am going to dilute this dark walnut about 50% with water, and even with that, it's still a very deep, rich color, and I like it a lot. These stains are super user-friendly. Um, they're probably sometimes not as solid as a dye stain, but I actually prefer the way that they look to most dye stains. I think that they just form a really nice uniform color, and most importantly, I find them a lot easier to work with than dye stains. You don't usually have to use sealer, and as long as you raise the grain before you use them, I find that they just look really good. Even on a wood like walnut, which is what a lot of this piece is made of, it still takes the stain well. And um, on the sides that are not walnut, it still also takes the stain pretty well too. I mean, surprisingly, it's not. It'll never look exactly like walnut, but it does look pretty good for just a very simple solution to kind of staining and dyeing things. And I'm really happy with that, and I'll probably continue to use that as much as I can, as opposed to like trans tint or some of the other like alcohol based dyes. I find them to be kind of not really user friendly and a lot of work, and they're really expensive. So this is where my problem started. I sprayed my first coat of sealer on, and from there the issues kind of started coming up. I was getting cracking, crazing everywhere. It's really hard to see. So I had to actually sand off that original sealer, and I burned through the stain a lot, but I just patched it up, and I was actually happy because I wasn't really thrilled about the way that the panels had originally turned out with the stain, but the second time I did it, I found that they looked a lot better. So that was kind of a plus. But I wasn't really sure what was causing these problems with the cracking and crazing, and I'm pretty sure I know now. It's about 30 degrees in my shop right now, and that's definitely enough to cause problems. But the thing is that it wasn't 30 whenever I sprayed. So I was kind of thinking that, you know, what happened was that when I got there, all of the paint and all of the lacquer was cold from overnight, it getting down so low. And what happened is that even though I got in there this morning, I turned on the heater, I turned on everything, to kind of get things warmed up, it just wasn't enough. Really, I think a good precaution when you have or worried about cracking or crazing or just spraying in cold temperatures in general, you know, my shop doesn't get super warm, but what I would probably do is that in the future, I'm just going to take my lacquer that I'm about to use. I'm going to go start my truck and turn the heater all the way up, and I'm probably just going to throw my materials in there for a minute before I spray them. I think that that is a good way to kind of prevent some of those problems because with the second coat of sealer, I didn't have that issue. And I used Evo Gemini's water-based sealer and top coat system, and I just sanded in between, and I didn't have any problems on the second coat. And it was warmer in the shop, and the only thing that I can attribute to it is that I don't think that there's any kind of contamination here. Um, I mean, that's a possibility. Many people will say that, but I just don't think that that's the case. Just based on what I know about, you know, the way that I did this piece, there's not really anything that I would have used that would have caused that. I don't use any silicone or wax-based products in my shop, generally speaking, and I don't. I just don't really use those kinds of products. So this is the top coat for that system. The other thing that I didn't like was that whenever I used my I got a new cap spray for Christmas, and when I first sprayed the sealer, I used the three out of that cap spray Maxim Elite. It's a nice gun, but for this, it was just running way too, like it was just way too much. Even with a three in the cap spray, the Maxim Elite, it was just way too much material getting on the surface, and you could argue that contributed to the crazing. I don't know. I don't think so though, because I was probably still under 5 mils, but nonetheless, it did come out better with this 1.5 and a B air cap on this Apollo sprayer, but it's still on the cap spray turbine. So yeah, I mean, it definitely helps to use probably like a middle of the road needle, like a 1.5. Even though I think that generally speaking, most of the products that you're going to run into with an HVLP, because HVLP turbines are pretty severely underpowered, you're going to need at least a 1.8 or a 1.5. Um, any smaller than that, generally speaking, unless you have a really runny material, it's just kind of going to be difficult to get a good atomization. But if you are having problems with orange peel, that's something to consider. So the next thing I did was I started polishing up this hardware, getting it ready, and that was going to be it. Put this thing back together and get some pictures of it. So here's the finished piece, and it came out pretty nice in my opinion. I like the way it looks. It's got a darker look to it, and that's kind of what I wanted. So yeah, um, it was a tough restoration for me, but I just decided not to give up on this piece, and I'm glad I didn't. So thanks for watching.